I was sitting at the kitchen table that morning, sorting through a stack of mail I'd been avoiding, when I noticed it. My savings account, what was left of the money Harold and I had spent 40 years building, was suddenly lighter. Not by much, just enough that anyone else might have shrugged and thought it was a mistake. Except I don't shrug things off. I learned to be vigilant the hard way after Harold passed, and I had to figure out the mortgage, the insurance, the utilities, everything he used to do without me ever knowing. I became the woman who double-checked every receipt. I pulled the latest bank statement closer and felt my pulse skitter in my throat. The withdrawal was labelled transfer to joint household expenses. I hadn't authorised any transfer. I lived alone. I tried to convince myself it was a clerical error. Maybe the bank had mixed up account numbers. Maybe it was some subscription I'd forgotten to cancel. But a cold little voice in my chest whispered, "You know exactly what this is." I thought of my daughter, Jenna, and her husband, Derek. How, after Harold died, they'd insisted on helping me simplify everything. They were so eager to combine my accounts, for convenience. So patient, so reassuring. I remember Jenna patting my hand in the bank office, saying, "Don't worry, Mum, you'll always be taken care of." And I'd believed her, because I wanted to. The phone rang, startling me out of my thoughts. It was my neighbour, Sharon, calling to ask if I was still coming to her book club that evening. I said I'd try. My voice sounded strange in my own ears, thin, trembling. I hung up and just sat there, staring at that line on the statement. A few hours later, I walked down to the corner market to clear my head. That's when I ran into Anita, a woman I'd known for years. She was cheerful, almost giddy, leaning in like she couldn't wait to share a juicy tidbit. "Funny thing," she said, lowering her voice. "I saw Derek at O'Malley's last night with the boys. He was joking about how you'd never miss it if he borrowed a little extra. Said, 'She won't notice if we take a little. She's got plenty.'" Her words didn't make sense at first. They sounded distant, like she was speaking through a tunnel. I tried to laugh it off, but something in my chest went very still. When I got home, I didn't take off my coat. I went straight to the small file cabinet in the living room, the one I'd labelled Harold's Affairs all those years ago. I pulled out the folder marked Accounts. My hands shook as I set it on the kitchen table. I'd spent my whole life believing that trust was the same as love, that letting people have access to your world was proof of family. But that afternoon, as the late winter sun slid across the floor, I began to understand something I wished I'd learned sooner. Trust doesn't mean turning away when something feels wrong. And love doesn't mean letting people steal from you because they assume you're too tired to notice. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the kitchen table, long after the streetlights clicked on, the folder open in front of me, the bank statements lined up like little witnesses. Each line item felt like a betrayal I'd almost allowed myself to excuse. Because that's what I'd always done, excuse things. When Jenna was in college and called crying because her financial aid hadn't come through, I'd driven across the state to hand her a check. She didn't even have to ask. When Derek lost his job 2 years later, I paid their mortgage for 4 months so they wouldn't lose the house. Every Christmas, every birthday, every moment when life pressed too hard, I was there with my checkbook, telling myself it was what Harold would have wanted. And maybe he would have. But I think, if he were here, he'd be ashamed of how small I'd made myself to stay useful. I traced my finger down one of the statements, pausing on the $500 withdrawal labelled emergency funds. That was 2 weeks ago. I tried to remember if Jenna had called to say something had happened, if one of the kids was sick or the car had broken down. But there had been no call, no text, no knock on my door. Nothing. The worst part wasn't the money. It was the certainty that they hadn't even thought twice about taking it. That somewhere, over dinner or a casual glass of wine, they'd convinced themselves it was harmless. Just a little. I remembered Derek's laugh. He always had that smug, too loud chuckle that grated my nerves. I could almost hear him saying it. She won't notice. She's old. She won't remember. I pressed my palm to my chest and closed my eyes, willing the hot shame to settle. This was how it started, I thought. The slow erosion of respect, the way people begin to treat you like a relic, useful only for what you can give. The kitchen clock ticked into the early hours. I tried to picture the version of me they thought they were stealing from, a doddering old woman who didn't know better, a woman who would nod and smile and pretend not to notice. But that wasn't me. Not really. I had survived too much to be undone by their greed. I'd buried a husband. I'd fought cancer. I'd rebuilt my life more than once. And now I was supposed to sit here, silent and grateful, while they treated me like a living bank account. No. I felt something tighten in my chest. An old, familiar strength I hadn't felt in years. The same feeling that had carried me through the worst days, when Harold's hospital bills piled up and the house almost slipped out from under us. It was the feeling that said, "You have been underestimated before, and every time you have proven them wrong." I stacked the statements in a neat pile, slid them back into the folder, and stood. Tomorrow, I would find out exactly how much they'd taken, and then I would decide what to do about it. I woke up before dawn, the house still and dark around me. The folder sat on the kitchen counter, waiting. I brewed a pot of coffee and carried my mug to the table like it was armor. I spread the statements out again, this time with a yellow highlighter in one hand and a pen in the other. Line by line, month by month, the story revealed itself. It wasn't just one or two transactions. It was dozens. I found withdrawals for household expenses I'd never agreed to, payments to a landscaping company I didn't use, even a recurring charge for some fancy meal subscription box. And always the same pattern. Amounts just small enough that I might have overlooked them if I hadn't been paying attention. Just small enough that they could convince themselves it was harmless. When I finished, I sat back and stared at the numbers. Over $6,000 in the last year alone. I thought about Jenna, sitting across from me last Thanksgiving, gushing about how grateful she was for everything I did, how she'd kissed my cheek and told me I was the glue that held our family together. And all the while, she was stealing from me. I pressed the heel of my hand to my forehead. My cheeks burned with humiliation, but underneath the embarrassment was something colder, something that had the shape of rage. I picked up the phone and called Jenna. She answered on the third ring, her voice groggy. "Mum, is everything okay?" I took a deep breath. "Jenna, I need to ask you something. Have you been using my accounts without telling me?" There was a pause. The kind of silence that stretches too long. The kind that tells you everything before the person opens their mouth. "Mum," she sighed, "I think you're confused. We talked about this. You said we could use the funds if there was an emergency." "That was for emergencies," I said, my voice sharper than I'd meant. "Not meal kits, not landscaping, not things you wanted but didn't need." Another pause. Then she laughed. High, brittle. "Oh, come on, it's not like it's hurting you. You have enough. We're just taking a little." Just a little. I felt something go flat in me, like a candle blown out. "You didn't think I would notice?" "Mum," she said, her voice dropping into that patronizing tone she used when I mixed up appointments. "Don't make this into a big thing. It's just easier this way." "Easier for who?" I whispered. She didn't answer. I hung up. My hand was shaking so badly, I had to set the phone down on the counter to keep from dropping it. I stood there for a long time, watching the first pale stripes of dawn push through the curtains. All those years I had spent trying to be the good mother, the dependable one, the safe place everyone returned to. And this was my reward, being picked over like I was already gone. I walked to the window and rested my palm against the cold glass. No more, I thought. They wanted to see how much I'd tolerate, They were about to find out I'd reached my limit. That morning, I didn't bother changing out of my robe before I called the bank. I sat at the kitchen table with my cup of coffee, cold now, and listened to the hold music drone in my ear. My heart thudded in my throat like it did the day Harold died, the same dull, sick dread that something irreversible had happened. When the banker finally answered, I tried to keep my voice steady. "My name is Martha Reynolds," I began, smoothing the edge of the folder with my free hand. "I need to review all recent transactions on my accounts, and I want to discuss options for securing them." She was polite, efficient, almost painfully cheerful. "Of course, Mrs. Reynolds. I can help you with that. Do you have your verification information?" I rattled it off. Account number, social security, Harold's old work ID. All the details I'd kept memorized, even when everyone assumed I couldn't. When she started reading the list of transactions aloud, I closed my eyes and let the numbers blur together. Each withdrawal was a cut, each payment a reminder that I'd been naive enough to trust people who thought I was too old to defend myself. By the time she finished, my shame had calcified into something hard and cold. "Thank you," I said, when she asked if I needed anything else. "I'll be coming in later today to take care of this in person." I hung up before she could reply. I walked upstairs, showered, and dressed in my best navy slacks and a cardigan Harold always liked. I brushed my hair back neatly, put on lipstick. When I looked in the mirror, I almost didn't recognize the woman staring back. She looked tired, but she also looked ready. Before I left the house, I called Jenna again. This time, she didn't pick up. I left a message. "Jenna, it's your mother. I'll be at the bank today. I've reviewed the accounts, and I know everything you and Derek have taken. We will talk about this. But understand me. This is not going to continue." My voice didn't shake. I hung up and slipped my phone into my purse. The drive to the bank felt longer than it was. Every stoplight seemed determined to give me time to reconsider, to ask myself whether it was worth it to start a fight with my own daughter. But then I'd hear her voice in my mind. "She won't notice if we take a little." And the shame would twist into anger all over again. By the time I pulled into the parking lot, I wasn't second-guessing anything. I went straight to the counter and asked to see a manager. Her name was Danielle, young, with kind eyes that flicked over my folder as she ushered me into her office. "How can I help you today, Mrs. Reynolds?" she asked. I took a breath. "I need to freeze all joint accounts immediately, and I'd like to set up a new account, one with only my name." Her eyebrows lifted a fraction, but she didn't question me. "Of course," she said softly. "You're not the first person to have to do this." I swallowed. "No," I said, "but I wish I'd been the last." She slid the forms across the desk. I picked up the pen, and my hand was steady as I began to sign. The forms were simple enough, a few signatures, a few initials. But each line I signed felt like erasing a piece of the woman I'd tried so hard to be. The one who never said no. The one who believed that family meant unquestioning trust. The one who swallowed her discomfort rather than risk a confrontation. I pressed the pen harder against the paper, leaving a groove where my name was written. Danielle moved methodically, explaining each step. "These accounts will be inaccessible to the secondary users within 24 hours, she said. "Any pending transfers or payments will be declined." Good, I thought. Let them feel the way I'd felt blindsided, humiliated, forced to reckon with what they'd done. While she set up the new account, I opened my phone. 3 missed calls from Jenna. 1 voicemail. I didn't listen. I couldn't. Not yet. Instead, I focused on the screen in front of me, the clean new account bearing only my name. No co-signers, no authorized users. Danielle turned the monitor so I could see it. "You'll receive a new debit card in the mail within 5 to 7 business days, she said. "Is there anything else you'd like to do today?" I hesitated. Then I pulled out the list I'd made the night before. Every automatic payment, every subscription, every hidden tether tying me to their expectations. "I'd like to cancel these," I said, effective immediately. I watched her fingers dance over the keyboard, and with each confirmation click, I felt a little lighter. When I finally stood to leave, Danielle reached across the desk and squeezed my hand. "You did the right thing," she said quietly. I nodded, though I wasn't sure I believed it yet. In the parking lot, I sat in my car for a long time, staring out at the grey sky. For so many years, I'd told myself it was easier to look the other way, that it was kinder to let them take what they needed, that saying no would only drive them away. But they had driven themselves away. And now, for the first time, I was the one shutting the door. When I pulled out of the lot, my phone rang again. I let it go to voicemail. By the time I got home, Jenna had sent 4 texts. "Mum, what's going on? Did you change the account? We can't pay the bills. Call me right now." I set the phone face down on the kitchen counter and made myself a cup of tea. I drank it, standing at the sink, staring out at the backyard. The wind was picking up, tossing the dead leaves across the patio. For once, I felt no urge to pick them up. Let them scatter. It didn't take long for the storm to hit. By morning, my voicemail box was full. Jenna's voice wavered between outrage and desperation. "Mum, you can't just freeze everything. We have responsibilities. You're overreacting. We didn't do anything wrong. Please, just call me back." Derek was less diplomatic. His messages were short, sharp, and full of venom. "This is insane. You're punishing us for nothing. You're going to ruin us over a few withdrawals?" I let the phone ring over and over until it fell silent. For the first time in years, the quiet didn't feel lonely. It felt like a reprieve. I spent the day cleaning out the guest room, the one they'd always stayed in when they needed to save money. I stripped the sheets, boxed up the toys their children had left behind, wiped the dresser clean. Every motion felt like a declaration. This is mine again. That afternoon, Jenna showed up on my porch. I watched through the lace curtains as she stood there, arms crossed tight over her chest, her jaw set in that stubborn line I'd known since she was a little girl. She rang the bell twice, then pounded with her fist. "Mum!" she shouted. "Open the door!" I almost did. I almost let her in, let her explain, let her twist it all around so I'd be the one apologizing. But then I remembered her laughing voice. She won't notice if we take a little. And I stayed where I was. Eventually she slumped against the door, her head bowed. When she finally turned to leave, her shoulders were shaking. I pressed a hand to the center of my chest, feeling the dull ache there. It would have been easier to let her in. Easier to pretend this hadn't happened. But easier doesn't mean right. That night, I listened to the voicemails again, not to torture myself, but to understand exactly how little remorse there was in any of them. Jenna's last message was a single sentence. "I can't believe you'd do this to your own daughter." I set the phone down. I whispered into the dark kitchen as if she could hear me. "And I can't believe you'd do this to your own mother." The next morning I called my lawyer. I told him I wanted to update my will. He asked if something had happened. I closed my eyes. "Yes," I said quietly. "Something finally happened." 2 days later, they came together. Jenna and Derek stood on my front porch, their faces tight and pale. Even before I opened the door, I could feel the tension radiating through the wood. I thought about pretending I wasn't home, but I was done hiding, done making myself small so they could feel big. I unlocked the door and stepped back. Jenna spoke first, her voice too bright, too brittle. "Mum, can we come in?" I nodded and gestured to the kitchen table, the same place I'd balanced checkbooks and signed birthday cards and written out grocery lists, the same table where I'd discovered they were stealing from me. They sat down across from me. For a moment, none of us spoke. Then Derek cleared his throat. "This has gone too far," he said. "We need to fix this. You can't just cut us off. We have expenses. The kids have needs." I folded my hands together. "I know." Jenna's eyes brimmed with tears. "You don't understand how hard it's been for us, Mum. You think we were taking advantage, but we weren't. We were just helping yourselves," I finished, my voice low and steady. Jenna's mouth snapped shut. "I have every withdrawal printed out," I said, sliding the folder across the table. "Every transfer, every payment. Over $6,000 in 1 year. Without my permission." Derek bristled. "It was for the family." "For your family," I corrected. "Not mine." He flinched, but I didn't soften. I wouldn't. "You sat in someone's bar," I continued, "and laughed about how I wouldn't notice if you took a little. You thought my memory was slipping, that I was too old to defend myself." Jenna wiped at her cheeks, her hands trembling. "Mum, we didn't mean to hurt you, but you did," I said simply. Silence pressed in from all sides. I could hear the refrigerator humming, the old clock ticking over the stove. Finally, Jenna spoke again, her voice small. "What do you want us to say?" I looked at her. Really looked. The daughter I'd held as a baby. The girl I'd sat up with during fevers. The woman who'd become a stranger. "I don't want you to say anything," I said. "I want you to hear me." I leaned forward, my hands flat on the table. "I will not be your safety net anymore. I will not let you use me to cover the parts of your life you don't want to face. If you think that's cruel, I suggest you ask yourselves why you think you deserve everything I have." Derek shook his head. "You can't just—" "Yes," I interrupted. "I can." Jenna's tears slipped free, trailing down her cheeks. "But we're your family," she whispered. I closed my eyes, fighting the urge to reach for her hand. "Family doesn't steal," I said quietly. "Family doesn't treat love like a bank account." They didn't argue after that. They left without another word, the door clicking shut behind them. I sank into the nearest chair, shaking so badly I had to brace my hands against the table. It felt like I'd severed something that could never be mended. And maybe I had. But in the quiet that followed, I also felt something else. Relief. I thought I would feel emptier than this. I thought the silence would swallow me whole. But as the hours passed, I felt lighter, like I'd set down a burden I'd been carrying so long, I forgot it wasn't part of me. I spent the next morning in my lawyer's office. Mr. Harlow had been handling my affairs since Harold died, and he didn't ask many questions when I handed over the updated documents. "I'd like to amend my will," I told him, my voice clear. "Everything goes into a trust, for my grandchildren, not their parents." He looked up from his notepad. "Are you sure?" I thought about Jenna's tearful face, Derek's angry sputtering, and the long years of excuses that had turned me into something useful instead of something loved. "Yes," I said. "I'm sure." He nodded once. "All right, Martha. We'll make it official." When I left his office, the winter sun was shining bright and brittle across the sidewalk. I tilted my face to it, feeling the warmth even through the cold. I drove home with the windows cracked just enough to let the air in. For the first time in years, I wasn't wondering who would be calling or what they'd be needing next. That afternoon, I baked a pan of cornbread, just for myself. I ate it warm from the oven, the butter melting across the golden top. I didn't save a piece for anyone. When the phone rang, again, I didn't answer. It rang 5 more times that day, Jenna's number lighting up the screen over and over, but I had nothing left to say. In the evening, I sat in the living room with the folder of statements on my lap. I thought about burning them, but something made me keep them, not as a weapon, but as a reminder that love without respect is just another form of quiet cruelty, a reminder that it isn't selfish to protect what you've worked for, a reminder that sometimes the most loving thing you can do, for yourself and for the people you've raised, is to draw a line they can't cross. The next morning, I was up early, unable to sleep. I poured a cup of coffee and stood at the kitchen window, watching the pale dawn creep across the yard. My phone chimed with a single text. Megan. Hi, Grandma. I heard Mum and Dad are mad. Are you okay? My chest tightened. My oldest granddaughter, barely 16, but already more thoughtful than most adults I knew. Me. I'm okay, sweetheart. Just taking some time for myself. A moment later, the reply. Megan, I love you. I'll come visit soon. I read the words twice, then a third time, feeling something soft and fragile bloom in my ribs. Maybe I hadn't lost everything. Maybe there were still people who saw me for who I was, not what I could give. I closed my eyes and let that truth settle over me like a quilt. I would be fine. I would be free.
What would you do in this situation? Let us know in the comments. If this story had you on the edge of your seat, smash that like button and subscribe for more jaw-dropping family drama, shocking betrayals, and the revenge stories you won't believe.